and stuff. So it's going to do a crazy thing. Okay, everybody. I have been so excited to be having this conversation. I'm going to start with a few things. So Yasmine Mohammed is somebody that I was introduced through Candace Horback. And if you guys do not know, she is my partner in crime. She's one of my favorite females, most intellectual, stimulating humans. She has a show called Chatting with Candace. And as of recently, that bad woman has been out there co-hosting Alex Jones's show. The reason I bring her up, I think it's so important to not only speak about the women that help you find other women, but speak about the women who help you find other women that make you feel less crazy. And the reason I say this is because when I came home from Afghanistan, I was told that everything I was feeling about this specific Islamic extremist faith was crazy. I was crazy. Kelsey, how dare you? How dare you feel that way about another religious human? How dare you? You should know better. You went to war. You were brainwashed. You were X, Y, and Z. And my response has always been, war doesn't need to include me watching grown men rape young boys. It does not need to include me watch young women being buried to their heads and then having rocks thrown at them till they're killed, or young girls that are married off at the age of 6 and 9 to 50-year-old men. When Candace brought you to me, my first thought was, how have I not known about you in the past decade since Afghanistan for me? How have you not been the leader in this voice? And maybe you have, but how have we not heard more about this? And then I started to do a dive and realize, oh, they don't want you to talk. They don't want you to know what was going on in Canada under the guise of freedom and empathy and compassion. And how could they ever allow things like honor killings or not even trying, tying up young girls and whipping their feet to the point where they scream and then marrying them off to terrorists? I realized you were the human I needed to be talking to next. So thank you, number one, so much for writing the book Unveiled that you did. Thank you for taking your time to read it out loud and constantly have to relive this story of hell, because it gives everyone else, even if you are not from the Muslim faith, even if you are not from any faith, it gives an insight into what the real darkness is when you take any religion and you slap extremists onto it. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolute pleasure, Kelsey. That is exactly how I felt listening to your interviews. Like, you would say things that were so spot on. Like in the trigonometry interview, you said, how can we fight against people who value death over life? And I was like, she understands, like she gets it. And the people that try to silence you and tell you, how dare you be feeling like this? How dare you say this? Those people are genuinely gaslighting you. You have seen things, you have heard things, you have smelled things, you have felt things that they have no clue, right? But they're trying to tell you that you're the bad person, you're the crazy one, you're the wrong one. They're demonizing you for things that they are completely ignorant about. And to be perfectly honest, lacking empathy. Yeah. Like, it's a level of cruelty. They try to pretend that it's like coming from a place of empathy, like, oh, we care about everybody, inclusivity and diversity. Like, no. When you are ignoring all of these situations that you talked about, the young boys being raped, the women being stoned to death, women in burqas, women not being allowed to go to school, little girls not being allowed to go to school, all of these things, when you turn a blind eye to that, you are the one who is the demon in this scenario, right? You are the one who is lacking empathy, not the person who's speaking up about it, not the person who's trying to say, hey guys, we've got a huge problem here. We need to address it. We need to talk about it. We need to acknowledge it first and foremost before we can even start to unpack something and try to figure out how to solve it. We have to acknowledge that it exists, but the minute you open your mouth and you try to say something about it, you're the Islamophobe, you're the racist, you're the bigot. And they're pointing their slanderous, words in the wrong direction.
I couldn't agree with that statement more. I say they, I'm talking about the people who really lean on the DEI kind of conversation. The most fascinating thing, and we're definitely going to get into your life story, but the most fascinating thing I have found over this past, 5-10 years, when Jordan said this was coming into the universities, we were going to see the boom. We've now seen the boom and the repercussions and what happens with DEI. I've always been a believer, right person for the right job, whether you're a man or a woman. Most of the time, depending on the job, it's not going to be the woman. And I'm okay with stating that. But the thing that gets me is when we go to war zones or we go to these places where you're fighting up against an ideology. You're not fighting a people, you're fighting an ideology that has taken hold on the people. What I find so fascinating is to hear how rebellious you were from such a young age. And if people have not listened, which I love that you did the audiobook, but I can only imagine after doing one, having to relive what you had to relive again. I heard parts where you would finish a sentence and I could hear you go, could feel just the weight of it. And there were so many parts in this that I actually messaged my other half and said, I need to continue listening to this book, but the version of me that can tolerate hearing this book is not here anymore. It's the callous side, the dark side, the one that could do the things. So to have to relive and tell these stories, I can imagine that you've gotten to a place where you have to disassociate on some level. You would have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and unfortunately, I was very, very, efficient at that for so many years.
Yeah.
It's actually been a real struggle for me to learn how to not disassociate, learn how to feel my feelings, learn how to feel the sadness, the rage, everything, the grief. I do such a good job of resisting it, pushing it off to the side and ignoring it and just moving forward. I have to do this. As a single mom too, I was like, there's no time for that, right? You got to get the degree, you got to get the job, you got to get it done. And eventually it catches up with you. You can't do that forever. Eventually, I had a really bad breakdown and I was agoraphobic. I was suicidal. It was really terrible. And it taught me that I have to learn, I have to sit with these feelings. I can't push them aside for the rest of my life. But it's not like a light switch, you know what I mean? Like as soon as you feel a little bit, and then you're like, okay, that's enough for the next few years,
Yeah.
like
we need a minute.
It's not like you just, it takes a while. And it's been a struggle, but I have found that in this work, in speaking up, like what you just said to me now, like reaching you and you hearing my story, that motivates me to continue going, right? That makes me feel like this is worth it. There is value in what I'm doing. And now I'm better at taking care of myself. Like now I'm much better at meditating, self-care. I didn't do any of that before. I was just like, I can handle anything. I can do anything. I'm sure all of this, you relate to every syllable of what I'm saying. And in fact, I would pride myself on how much I could diminish myself and just continue performing like just at a hyper degree. Right. But now I'm much better. So yes, I'll do the interviews, but I'm being so fed, so rewarded through hearing people like you, through my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, through my podcast and the people that I interview. And it's healing for me. As much as it's difficult to tell my story over and over again and to have these discussions, it is also very cathartic. And there's kind of a how can I say this? Like, I love that I can say it. Like, there's still a part of me that's like, that's right. I'm going to say it again and again like that. You silenced me. You covered me head to toe in black. You literally muffled me. You told me that my voice was shameful. And now I've got a microphone and I will just talk and talk and talk. And there's nothing anyone can do about it.
No, that's the truest sense of freedom. So let's get into the story so people understand what we're talking about. You really are the human who, and just for people who understand, you didn't grow up in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iraq or in Egypt, or you were there, but you did not grow. You grew up in British Columbia, Canada. And for people who don't understand that, the years she grew up in Canada were not filled with the Middle Eastern population the way they are now. We did not have Arabic signs or Farsi or Pashto or Dari. We did not have Surrey's community at the time. We did not have the immigration, which I consider to be a massive problem in Canada. We did not have what we have now, which is people on White Rock Beach from other countries stabbing people in the neck. We didn't have that. That's not what this was. So for you to grow up in a very, correct me if I'm wrong, very white, very affluent, very different Canadian country with a fundamentalist Islamic household, how does this happen?
Yeah. So I have to start the story a little bit further back from me. So I'm going to start with my parents. So my mom is from Cairo, Egypt, and my dad is from Gaza. And they met in university when when Gaza was under Egyptian authority. So my dad could go to university for free in Cairo. So my parents met there. Now, at this time, Egypt was a pretty secular state. Gaza was pretty open. You had Israeli people coming in and fishing, going to the beach. Like there was more of a normalcy at that time. There wasn't this Islamic, like what you see now, this political Islam. And my parents got married, both of them being just like nominally Muslim just because they grew up that way, but it was almost like insulting. Like, no, my mom would never have worn a hijab. No one in her family would have worn a hijab because that's like for villagers. That's for like uneducated people. That's where it was at this time. And, belly dancers at the wedding, everybody's doing shots. Like it was not at all what you would expect.
Cannot imagine that.
Yep. It was a totally different world. And they went to San Francisco, and it was peace, love, and hippie era then, because now we're talking about the 60s. It was the late 60s. And my mom found like, this is not a good place for raising kids. So let's move out of here. And then the distance between San Francisco and Vancouver is not very long. And because my dad is Palestinian, he could basically get refugee status anywhere in the world he wanted. And so they're like, let's just go to Vancouver because it's close by. And that's where I was born. And that's where their marriage fell apart. And so at this point, my sister was born in San Francisco. My brother and I were both born in Vancouver. And my dad moved all the way to the other side of the country in Montreal. And my mom was left with 3 kids to raise on her own. So she's looking for community. She's looking for support. She's looking for maybe other Arabic speaking women that she can connect with. So she goes to the mosque, not because she's got any kind of religious, interests at all, but just because she's looking for a community.
At this point, was she wearing the hijab?
No, not at all.
Really?
No.
Okay.
No. She was, it would never have even crossed her mind to wear a hijab at this time. And like I said, it would have been embarrassing for her family if she even talked about it or thought about it. But it all happened. So she met this guy at the mosque who was already married, already had 3 children, and took her on as his second wife. So obviously in Canada, polygamy is against the law, but it happens all the time. And he told her, you need to quit your job. My mom was an accountant. He said, you need to quit your job because it's shameful for a woman to be working. So I'm going to need you to stay home and collect welfare as a single mom of 3 kids. So they didn't admit the fact that he was married to her, of course, because his first wife, who was a French Canadian convert, by the way, His first wife was his actual legal wife, and my mom was just like the woman that lives in the basement who is collecting child support or
And the way you
welfare
spoke
checks.
about that in the book, the way you made it sound with the upstairs children and the children in the basement was very nauseating.
Yeah. Yeah. So from the beginning, you always know, like, that's how it works. Like, that's the hierarchy. The first wife is the most important one. And then the subsequent wives are just like
Mhm.
they lower down the totem pole. And this man was on the train that was all over the Middle East at this time. It started in Iran with the Islamic regime of Iran, and it was in Syria, it was in Gaza, it was in Iraq, it was all over. And what it was this combination of pro-Islam, anti-West. And one of the main leaders, so it's like Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Hamas, Hezbollah, like, you know who I'm talking about when I say this, right?
Mhm.
Assad in Syria, they are the ones who are like anti-West, pro-Islam. And so one of the leaders of this pro-Islam, anti-West sentiment, which are, for shorthand, they're called Islamists. It's called the Islamist ideology. One of the leaders is a man named Sayyid Qutb. And he told the story of when he was in America, he went to some sort of nightclub or something, and none of the women wanted to dance with him. They were all rejecting him, but they were dancing with other men.
Sounds like an
And
incel to me.
yes. So he got so angry, and he's like, the West is full of dirty heathens, the women are whores, and da 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 da. And he was one of the people that started this ideology. Now the
Says
thing
the
is,
guy who's at the club looking for like what? Okay, sorry.
yeah. So it was his anti-West that pushed, and
Right.
in response to the anti-West, it's going to be pro-Islam. And they came up with the slogan, Islam is the answer. Islam huwa al-hal. That resonated with my mom so much because when they were in San Francisco, my dad loved all of it. He loved especially he loved the free love part of the piece, and, the hippie era. And
Yeah.
he was totally into all of that, and she was not. And then when their relationship fell apart, she blamed these dirty, heathen, infidel, whorish Western people, right? And so it really was like, this is the answer. And so she started hating the West, even though she's living in Canada, and started to learn about this political ideology that is pro-Islam, anti-West. So she didn't know anything about Islam as a religion, as a faith before this. She only started to learn about it as a source of to push back against the West.
Did she read the Quran when she was a child?
Not as a child. No, she went to Christian schools. Her family,
Wow.
yeah, because they wanted her to learn French. My mom is from like a well-to-do family in Egypt. Like her uncle is the first president of Egypt. So they're like, yeah. So she's like super fancy schmancy, had nannies doing everything, and didn't even know how to boil water when she married my dad, kind of thing.
Wow.
And so no, she was not at all reading the Quran. She was like in mini skirts, and hanging out, living her life in Egypt. But she was so.
And brought to you by XXXY Athletics. You guys can check them out at xx-xyathletics.com and make sure you use the code Kelsey20. That will help you save. I'm so excited to be a new ambassador of XXXY. I absolutely love what they stand for, and I'm proud to work with them because they are founded on truth, dedication to quality, and they are built for style and performance. Women deserve the opportunities that sports and single-sex spaces provide because sex matters at the end of the day. It is the single biggest determinant of athletic performance. And it's completely unfair and dangerous, as most of you know, to allow males who are XY chromosome to compete with girls and women who are XX in sports. You guys can share your stories just by doing the hashtag workout speak out. Tag myself, Kelsey_Sharon, and the XX_XY athletics on Instagram, and we will share everything. We need to get fit and speak our minds, mobilize into a force that fights back for women's sports. So start fighting. The way that you do that is go to XX-XY athletics, go use the code Kelsey20 at checkout, slap on that gear, signal to the world that you are done allowing others to walk into female spaces. I believe in this brand. I believe in the mission. I believe in what they do. So go grab some now. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Good Livin'. I am so excited to tell you about something that's become such a meaningful part of my wellness routine, Good Livin'. Now, this isn't any brand. This is actually a brand I know all of the owners behind. And let me tell you, their integrity, their dedication, and their quality is the real deal. Their microdosing and functional blends are crafted with intention, and you can feel it. Everything is tested and made to support you in tapping into your own rhythm. We're talking about blends for anxiety, depression and stress, ADHD, brain health, inflammation, sleep, and energy. Seriously, they have thought of everything possible. I know firsthand how much love they pour into every single product. So if you're ready to check them out and explore more, go to itsgoodlivin.com. And trust me, it's a journey worth taking. That's itsgoodlivin.com, itsgoodlivin.com. And make sure to use the code BRASS and get 20% off your first order today.
Angry at the fact that she had these 3 kids. The thing about my mom too is she never wanted to have children.
Oh,
She never should have been a mom.
Yeah, you make that one thing I love about your book is the description. And I can imagine, again, the level of pain and having to not only hear that as a child, but then relive it. But the descriptors of your mother and the words she used to her, and I'm going to you were nothing. I should never have had you. I pissed you out. Like the words that came out that you wrote down. For some will say, well, that's an exaggeration. Probably your mother would never, but they don't understand hatred when it's baked in like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was resentful because she was like, it was her, as a woman, you get married and then you have kids and you play the part of the wife. And that's just socially what she was supposed to do. And so she did it. She did what she was supposed to do. And then she had these kids and now she's fucking stuck with them. She didn't want them. She especially didn't want me because I'm the 3rd child. I'm the one that came at the end. And their marriage was like falling apart before I was even born. I was still in utero. Like my dad was like, why weren't you on the pill? Why did you? I didn't want this. And my mom had an ectopic pregnancy before me, so she didn't think that she could get pregnant. So neither of them were thrilled. Yeah. You know, some would call me a miracle baby, but they wouldn't. I would.
You're the miracle child that challenged the system is what you did.
Yeah. Yeah. And so she was resentful. She was angry. She has these 3 kids. She has to deal with it. She hates the West for ruining her marriage. She's just angry at everything. And this is a really angry ideology. You've met these people. You know these people. You understand the level of just violent hate. And it spoke to her. She just like a fish to water. She just hook, line, and sinker. She became a scholar of Islamic studies at Al-Azhar University. She got her master's degree. She became the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school. She became worse than the guy who recruited her, the man that she married. Like he was an abusive asshole, but she became much more of an Islamist than him.
Well, I think there's a deeper word for abuse than what he did, but we'll get into that. When you look at your mother, she reminds me of, and again, I know this is your mother, so I'm trying to have some respect here, but she reminds me, as she rolls her eyes, she reminds me very much of kind of what we saw in the Jiwa era of Western women looking because they're just searching for an identity. They're searching so much, and they are the ones that got taken on Twitter and met up with, the Taliban and all of the men that are going to look after her. And then they're sold into sex slavery. And then they beg to come back to the country and they wonder why. It's the people who are lost. This ideology, personally, for me, not blanket statementing. Well, people are still going to say I'm doing it. Get over yourself. It very much feels like it is the ideology that will suck in the lost souls.
100%. 100% without a doubt. And that's true for the men that they forced me to marry too.
Well, we're going to get into that. Yeah. So when you're talking about the level of abuse, you start by the age of 6. You start talking in the book about when you're 6 years old, the first time you had your legs tied together with a skipping rope on your bed and you had your feet beaten. Now, I know this is a tactic that is used not only by the Chinese when they're harming individuals, extremists, because the bottom of the feet are somewhere where you can hide bruises and things like that. But 6 years old in Canada, you were being tied up to your bed to have your feet battered and bruised to the point where you could not walk. Over what?
Over not memorizing Quran, over missing a prayer. It was always some sort of Islamically related thing. Because, I was 6 years old, but the years before that, I thought I was living a normal life, and then this guy comes into our life and suddenly he's like, everything's forbidden. Haram, which you might have heard that word when you're in Afghanistan, just Islamically forbidden, right? Music is haram. Swimming is haram. Riding a bike is haram. Birthdays are haram. Playing with your non-Muslim friends are haram. So you're taking a 6-year-old girl who's lived a life up till now. I went to swimming lessons. I had a tricycle. I was looking forward to riding a two-wheeler. I never had a sleepover. I'd never had a birthday party at McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like all the things that you're looking forward to as a kid was just like, nope, none of this is going to happen anymore. I mean, even we lived in an apartment building and I'd walk down the hall with my little Barbie suitcase and hang out with Chelsea and Lindsay, and we'd switch like clothing and shoes and whatever. Nope, can't play with them anymore. They'd come to the door. Can Yasmin come out and play? And they'd be like, nope, she's busy. Nope, she's busy, until they finally stopped coming. And I wasn't, you've completely ripped away everything that brought me joy as a 6-year-old girl, and you've replaced it with, and you have to memorize these weird words from this book, and you have to do these prayers, like it just came out of nowhere. And my mom is suddenly covering her hair in this ugly gray thing, and he's breaking her records and like, nope, no more Dolly Parton in this house, no more music, and handing the shards to us and saying, break this, break your mom's things. And she's just standing there letting him do this. Like, he entered our lives like a bomb, and I hated him, and I couldn't understand. Like, I just really wanted my mom to snap out of it. I felt like she was hypnotized, and she was being indoctrinated into this cult. And I could, even as a kid, I could feel that. Like, I was just hoping she'd snap out of it. Kept waiting for the day she would snap out of it. Absolutely not. She allowed him to do the most heinous things, and she never protected me. In fact, she facilitated it in so many ways. And as a kid, because like I mentioned, my dad's all the way on the other side of the country. He's remarried at this point. He's got new kids. Like, he's moved on. He forgot that he even had his first set of kids. So she's like my only parent. And there's nothing in this world I want more than for her to love me. That's like, I'll do anything for this, for the love of my one and only parent, And so I could not bring myself to accept or to see that she was facilitating this abuse. I just blamed him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw my mom as like this victim, that he's like controlling her just like he's controlling us. And it wasn't until I was much older when it just dawned on me that, like, oh my gosh, you can't have an abuser like that in your home unless there is a protector.
Right.
There has to be another adult there allowing this to happen. And that was her.
You didn't experience what I consider traditional abuse. I think there are levels to everything in life. Abuse is abuse is abuse is abuse, whether it's verbal or physical. What I want the listeners and the people who are watching this to understand, who am I kidding? This is banned in Canada on YouTube. So the listeners, I want you to understand, if you haven't read this book, I do encourage it for several reasons. There's a level of abuse that goes towards children in this faith. I hate using the word faith because that's
It's not right.
let's try another word. In this
ideology.
I like it. Like So there's a level of abuse that happens that is normalized in this ideology. This is not I yelled at you and sent you to your room. I took your toys away. I didn't let you leave the house. I didn't give you what you want. You describe a situation, again, none of this is a shock to me, but it is far removed from where I used to have a mentality at. So it still hit a little harder. But there is a specific incident that you talk about. I think you were still quite young, where you were bound by your legs and your hands, and you were strung up by your feet and beaten.
Yeah.
What I would consider within an inch of your life.
Yeah.
And this was by a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
And when you told your mother the things that were happening to you, they not only fell on deaf ears, it was almost your fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So that incident happened. So my name is Yasmine, and I had just written my name as Jasmine. I changed the first letter.
Oh.
And that was my punishment for trying to be Western, for trying to be Canadian. And so they saw that as like this huge red flag that, like, oh, this has to be, we have to nip this in the bud kind of thing. And yeah, it was within an inch of my life. I did pass out because I'm hanging upside down and I'm crying. And so I'm like, there's mucus and tears and everything. And I, obviously couldn't breathe properly. Yeah. And then all of this abuse, my mom would act as if she would always act as if it was like brand new information. Like, what? No, that didn't happen. That can't be right. You were fucking there, bitch. Like,
right.
What is wrong? How can you, like, she would make me, she would gaslight me to the point that I thought I was crazy. Like, I was seeing, like, did I not see that? Did I not feel that? Did that not just happen? Because she was so good at making me believe her reality over my own reality. Like, she just was, I was born in, like, I was primed. She put in the software that made me never trust myself and never believe myself, my own eyes, my own body, my own, like, nothing. I believed her.
Right.
And if I would tell her about these things and she would be like, oh, that never happened, or that's not right, or something like that. Or she'd be like, what did you do? Oh, is it because blah, blah, blah. Like, even even the sexual abuse as a little girl, she would ask me, fuck.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but she would genuinely be like, like, what were you wearing? What were you doing? As a kid. And I remember her looking at me with disgust and anger, and I felt ashamed, but I didn't understand, what is this about? You know what I mean? She'd be like, well, were you wearing tight pants? And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, what were you doing that for? Did you want someone to look at you? as a kid, you don't even know what that means. Like, I
No.
don't even understand why am I feeling ashamed right now? But
I'm sorry.
yeah, it's that victim blaming really silences the victims, right? Because if you bring it up and you are shamed,
Right.
you don't want to bring it up again, because then you're only putting yourself out there to receive more feelings of shame. And so you don't want to feel that. And so you just shut your mouth.
I thought a lot about that in the way that Islam looks at virginity. And I thought a lot about that because for those that don't understand that, like, that is like, you're not allowed to ride horses or bikes or do
Yes.
anything. Like, it is
Yes.
quite strict. So when you started to experience this level of abuse, how was that seen? Because you were, number one, you didn't have a period yet. You were not of age. You were not, because that's what Islam considers a woman, i.e., a lot of children now are getting their periods between 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 years old. That is considered a woman that could be married off, which we're going to go down that path in a minute. But how was that for you? Because now the thing you were told to be protected and is so sacred, and that Allah has looked after so that you can be this human and have value, because that's the only thing that seems to have value in this ideology. How was that for you, realizing that?
Well, I never really put those things together, because the abuse, I was being physically abused by this man.
Right.
All the time. And so this was like an extension of that abuse, as far as I was concerned. Like, it didn't feel the same fear, the same freezing, the same disassociating, the same every way you would react to any kind of, physical abuse on your body, you react in the same way. And so it didn't register to me that this was that, you know what I
Got it.
mean? I wasn't thinking of it like that at all. But yeah, you just know that it's something that it's your fault. Like, you're to be blamed for this. And like, if you move, or if you say anything, or if you don't comply, or if you, it's your fault. You are helpless. You are in a position of, like, there is a power, there's a physical power over you, and you just have to comply. And that's what it was to me.
Right. So can we get into a little bit? I hate to keep, this is the hardest part of what I do, is talking to people who have real things that have happened in their life, because I want others to hear it, but I don't want to make you relive it. And I don't want to make you hold this. So I'm brought to you by culture. You guys know I am so dedicated to my mental health and my physical resilience. I'm always on the lookout for the next tool that makes the biggest difference. And that's why I'm so excited to share with you my new partnership with Culture. They are Canada's #1 cold plunge, and they are trusted by over 40,000 people across North America. The benefits are incredible, whether it's better sleep, reduced stress, faster recovery, or just more energy at the end of the day. And with Culture's unmatched quality and world-class customer care, this is the brand that I trust, not only for me, but my family. So if you're ready to challenge yourself, to change your life, improve your life, then go over to culture.com and use the code Kelsey at checkout. It's going to give you $250 off your first purchase. So what are you waiting for? Go on over, culture.com. Use the code Kelsey. Let's go. And brought to you by Ketone IQ. If you guys have not heard or seen me drinking these little bottles right here, you have been missing out. These guys right here are single-handedly the biggest part of my routine. Outside of the functional mushrooms, the movement, the sleep, the hydration, Ketone IQ is a #1 most important tool that I use in my toolbox. And let me tell you why. If you guys have never experienced runner's high, give this a try. That flow state, it is for real. Ketones are a uniquely powerful macronutrient that can cross the blood-brain barrier, and they increase the brain energy efficiency. And every time you take a Ketone IQ, you're going to notice the radical boost in performance, endurance, and just focus in general. For me, I use this when I road bike, when I run. As a mother, instead of using caffeine after 12 o'clock, I go and grab a ketone. More importantly, I use it before I podcast, before I do keynotes or anything important in my life. You will see a ketone in my bag, on the table, or anywhere near me. So do yourself a favor. Once you're done listening to this awesome episode of the Kelsey Sharon Perspective, go on over to the website partner.ketone.com/Kelsey. You're going to save, go grab yourself a subscription so you never miss out and you always have the energy you need. When I talk about the things I'm about to talk about, I'm right here and you're not holding it alone. And at any point, you tell me to shut the fuck up. Okay? All right. Let's talk a little bit about what happens when this ideology decides that children should be married to grown men. And why is this okay? And why is the rest of the world not screaming at the top of their lungs that young Afghani girls now are being sold and literally married at the age of 6 to 50-year-old men? I watched a video not that long ago that killed me because those are the girls that we left, that I left, and knew exactly what would happen to.
I mean, listen, you cannot in any way, shape, or form take any kind of, you had no control over any of this. None of this is on you. This started 1400 years ago when a 53-year-old man, a 53-year-old pedophile, married a 6-year-old girl and then convinced his followers that he was the best example for all of humanity for all of time. And so millions and millions and millions of girls over that time have been tortured, have been abused, have been raped to death because of this man's perfect example for all humanity for all time. And the most insidious part about all of this is how the mothers and how the women are so indoctrinated into believing that he really is the best example for all humanity for all time. And so they willingly give their daughters to be raped by these men as well. Yeah, there's the girls in these scenarios for over 1,000 years have been just sacrificed to these sick men with no protection. And in fact, it's worse than no protection, because if you try to speak up against it, obviously, if you try to speak up against it in the West, you know how it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But within the community as a Muslim, like, if you try to say, wow, that does not sound okay, like Muhammad really should not have done that. And how can you pretend that a 9-year-old girl is a grown woman? You are now a heathen. You are now an infidel. You are taking your life into your own hands if you're going to criticize that, right? Because now you've just criticized the most sacred, divine man that ever lived, right? And so they would rather sacrifice their daughters, their sisters, the girls in their families, rather than face the consequences of what could happen if they were to criticize that part of the ideology. And so there you have it.
So explain to me, if this is a transition here with, you have a Palestinian father, you have a mother that's on a little bit of the other side of things. And we look at, if we were to pull this all the way forward to the current present time, I don't want to talk about Israel, Palestine. Frankly, it's going to sound harsh what I'm about to say, but I don't give a fuck. Listen, I have a Jewish child. I am not Jewish. I'm Catholic. I believe you believe whatever you want to believe. And by Catholic, I mean I was baptized and did the whole thing as a child. I'm now a practicing of my own faith. I don't follow an ideology. I'm an open thinker. And when new evidence is presented, I work really hard to look at it face value without the emotional attachment. That being said, I do have a hard time wrapping my brain around this. You know, when we used to see, and I've heard people say, gays for Palestine, gays for Muslims, gays for this, LGBT this, LGBT that. And I always respond with, you do understand, right? That you would be put in a cage and burned alive or drowned to death or thrown off a bridge or raped to death or, you know, any of these. And people's response is, how could you say that? They would never do that to us. They would never harm us this way. Holy fuck. So how is it, riddle me this, Batman, how is it that you cannot be a gay man, you cannot be a gay woman, you cannot be LGBT? I mean, I have my own stances on that, but you cannot be any of those things, but yet you can go rape little boys outside my fob on Thursday nights.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct.
So what is this? And what am I talking about for the people that don't understand? We call them chai boys. There is another descriptor and a better word. What am I talking about here?
You're talking about the Afghani practice of raping boys, bachabazi, where the boys are basically treated. Listen, it's messed up, right?
Yes.
And it happens. Unfortunately, it happens in these societies where men and women are completely segregated. And these men don't have access to girls and women in the way that they have access to little boys. So because of the power dynamic with them being adults and them being little boys, they're preying on these boys. Now, if you ask them, they'd say, we're not gay.
Right.
We're not. And they don't see it that way. They see it as opportunity. I don't know. They're completely messed up people. They're, these are the same people that are also, sodomizing goats. So
we have it on video. I know.
Right?
Goats and young hedgehog, like hedgehog type animals. Yeah, we have them in nods. We can.
So, there's no understanding how their minds work. They're fucked up individuals, and there's unfortunately it's pedophiles, absolutely, but it's like normalized pedophilia that is like accepted. It's like in Egypt, they have taharrush, which is when a bunch of men, and if you can think of it like a zebra being attacked by hyenas. If there is a woman on her own, and we've seen like Tahrir Square, we saw it in Germany, right? Like we've seen it all over. Now we're familiar with it. But when there's a woman on her own and then the men surround her, these men don't even have to know each other. It's just like a part of the culture, like, oh, female on her own, prey, basically. Target. And then they all just attack her. They sexually assault her, they rape her, they do whatever they want, and they provide cover for each other. That happens so often that it has a name. This is what I'm talking. Like, why do we have a name for little boys who are being raped? Why do we have a name for men attacking a woman and sexually assaulting her in the streets? Like, it's so normalized that you've named this practice, and you are born and raised in a society that talks about it as if it's a thing. And so it doesn't feel like it's crazy outside the realm of human behavior, and this is like beyond even animalistic behavior. No, because it's a part of your culture, it's a part of your world, it's a thing, it's normalized.
So when you started talking about all these things publicly, obviously I'm skipping over a large step here and we're going to go back a bit, but when you started talking about these publicly, how was that received? Because I do know there are other individuals that you work with, whether it's in the Clarity Coalition or whether it's within your own organizations. How has this been received? Because it feels like between free hearts, free minds, all of the things you're speaking on, are you in fear of your life?
Yeah, of course. you can't say these things without understanding that there are people out there that would love to silence you through slitting your throat, right? This is you talked about being on that base in Afghanistan and getting this sense of like, oh wow, beyond these walls are just a whole bunch of people that want me dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it feels like. I know you don't want to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but
Nope.
that's what it feels like to be an Israeli, right?
Oh, no, I'm not
living in
disagreeing.
Israel.
The reason I don't want to get into it is I didn't want to turn this episode into a political. We can do a political episode on that. I got my own thoughts and feels.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, that's that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, I live it.
Yeah.
They live it. You live it. Like, we know that some of us don't have the luxury of not knowing what that feels like, not understanding what evil actually is. You know, a lot of people are living their lives, and I envy them. You know, they have they're living in this beautiful, ignorant bliss. Where that's why they silence you when you try to say these things, because they don't want to believe it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it. They'd rather live in their la la land and keep their heads buried in the sand because it's comfortable there, right? What you're saying to them is too much, and they'd rather not know that it exists. And so, before Jordan, I opened my mouth the first time, I knew that it was a risk.
Well, Jordan Peterson talks about this, right? Not everybody develops PTSD from extreme situations, right? It is only when you face malevolence in its truest form, when you only really see evil for what it is, the darkness in the eyes. And I say the eyes because eyes, in my belief, and the way that I work with people and energy and how I read you, your eyes are telling me everything about you. And they flip a switch that I wish I had never witnessed ever, because it told me this is what true malevolence feels, looks, and walks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that when Jordan Peterson was saying that, and I felt that deep in my soul too. And I realized, like, okay, so he knows it too, because there's, you know, he explained it so well. But yeah, it definitely is in the eyes too. And it changes you. Like he said, it changes you. You become a different person. You don't get to live like the rest of humanity. You're changed, you know,
you're awake.
And then you're awake. And then he continued to talk about it as you have to start seeing things at that point. If you're going to recognize evil and you're going to know that evil exists, then you have to start looking at things as good versus evil. Because we like to pretend that there is no evil. And we like to pretend that they're just misunderstood, or it's just childhood trauma, or it's just fine. This, or it's just that. Yeah, like we want to see the humanity in each other so much. But after October 7th, I think a lot of people were forced to realize, like, oh, wow, okay. So it truly is just evil. Like you can't think it's anything else, you know?
No, and you can't. And how dare you? I mean, when I was writing my book, I was told by my neighbor and by others who around me that were Muslim that everyone in the cul-de-sac would be like, you're just hateful. You're just hateful about it. Like, how could you feel that way about people you don't know? How could you paint them with a brush? How dare you? How could you? And I wrote about it, and I sat down, and I've gone through the Quran. I've gone through the Bible. I was forced to go through the Bible. The only one I'm working on now is the Torah, and I'm doing it not for a religious faith, but for a genuine curiosity of the writings so that I can speak to it with an educated manner. But more importantly, because now I can remove the emotion from it. I'm devoid of the emotional attachment around it, and more looking at it logically and going, how the hell could anybody with half a mind sit there and go, we should for sure be starving our people, and then we should be allowing child slavery and rape, and then we should also be okay with these things. And the one thing I do want to talk to you about, which I think is going to be, I mean, I'm just so fascinated with your life, and I'm so sorry you had to experience it, but what a gift it is to be able to continue to speak about it and educate. So the one thing that is still happening in Canada and is happening across the globe, like it has, like you said, for however many thousands of years, is arranged marriage.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with an individual once who said, yes, we met and we got married, and this was my thing, you learn to love them.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the terrorists you married?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even say that
Yeah.
facetiously. You married a legitimate Al-Qaeda member who's
Mhm.
now in prison. You were forced to marry an actual terrorist. I'm not trying to get clicks. This is the honest to God truth.
Mhm. Yeah. It's just another one of those things, just like the pedophilia and just like the sexual assault of women. It's another one of those things that's just been so normalized that they will excuse it. It's just like beating your wife. They'll excuse it. They'll say, "Oh, it was just lightly. I didn't break her nose or anything." Like so many horrific things have just been normalized.
Right.
And this is one of those things where in Islam, a woman does not even have to be present at her own marriage. Like I wasn't there. So many of the women I've spoken to on my podcast, you don't matter. This is an exchange of goods, that you are a thing.
It's slavery.
And it's slavery. Absolutely, it's slavery. And one man is selling you off to another man. And, then there is an exchange made between these two men. So you are just the thing. So you don't even, this indoctrination starts much, much younger. So you're not at that point in your life, like when I was 19, it's not like it would cross my mind to be like, wait a minute, don't I get a choice? Like that would be ridiculous. That thought wouldn't have never crossed my mind. It's like, if you remember the movie The Help, it's like an older movie. Yeah. And there was a point where the lady of the manor asks the slave, "Are you happy?" And then the slave was like, what kind of a question is that? Like, who even asks that? Who even thinks about happiness? How out of touch? I think about like, are my babies fed? Do I have a roof over my head? You know what I mean? I'm not thinking about, am I happy? That's what it spoke to me so much as a Muslim woman, because you don't think about that. You don't think about, what are my needs? What are my wants? What makes me happy? No.
Happiness is so
it's not even on the radar. Like it would never even come close, because you're just thinking about like, how can I survive? That's really what it's about. What can I, what rules do I have to follow? What things am I allowed to do or say to keep myself alive? And so yeah, that's my mom chose him because she said he was strong enough to control you. Yeah. So he was specifically chosen, like, oh, a terrorist, that's great. That'll finally keep Yasmine in line. Because, as a kid, I was always fighting back. I was always questioning. I mean, fighting back. It's not like normal fighting back. Like,
no.
When you're taught that women are less than men, that you are subordinate, that you have to accept being beaten, you have to accept being raped, you have to cover yourself head to toe, that you're constantly being told how shameful you are. Everything about you is shameful. Your body is shameful. Your voice is shameful. Everything. So you're diminished down to nothing. And so if I would this was one of the horrible things that I did, was that I had non-Muslim friends. I had a non-Muslim friend named Tiffany, who I dedicated my book to her. That was one of the worst possible things. Like, that's how I pushed back. That's how I was the rebel. That's how I was the bad girl, was that I wanted to have a non-Muslim friend. So she felt that this man would finally keep me from pushing back, questioning, wanting more for myself, anything like that. And she wasn't wrong. He, whatever tiny little bit of spark I had left in me, he was able to stifle. I went from wearing hijab to wearing niqab. So it was hijab covers everything but your face and hands. When I was married to him, it was everything covered in black. Didn't even have my eyes showing. Black gloves, thick black socks, imprisoned in the house. He would take, the brown paper that, like for meat packing paper, taped the windows just in case the curtains moved and someone might see in. Yeah, like it was, I was completely and utterly, entirely diminished. I was like, I think of myself at that time, if you're familiar with the Harry Potter films, when Voldemort was like shrunk into like this little worm thing. That's what I was. Just like hidden under the cloth, just nothing. And I didn't even know to be unhappy about it because it's just what you have to do. It's survival. Until I had my daughter. When I had my daughter, that's when the spark came up in me in a way that it had never before. So before that, I would want to fight, I would want to push, but I was too scared of burning in hell, too scared of being beaten, too scared my mom would never love me, too scared of XYZ. But once I had my little daughter and I held her in my arms and I felt a level of love that I'd never felt before, that I didn't even know was possible. And then I realized everything. It was just like this, everything was just like click, 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 click. I loved this little girl so much and I would do anything to protect her. And then I realized she didn't do anything to earn my love or to deserve my love. She just is. And I love everything about her. She's like a few hours old and I would give my life for her. Yeah. And that's what made me realize that my mom never felt that way about me. I kept thinking
harsh reality.
I wasn't good enough. Yeah. Because that whole time I was like, maybe if I marry the man she tells me to marry, maybe if I accept being beaten, maybe if I did all the things that she told me to do, hoping that she would eventually love me. I would finally know what it feels like to be loved by my mother. In that moment, I realized like there's nothing I can do. There's nothing that I did do to have her hate me, and there's nothing that I can do to have her love me. And then I also knew that I would do everything in my power to protect my daughter, that I would not be like my mother, and I would never allow her to be hurt the way that my mother allowed me to be hurt. And then him and my mom started talking about taking her to Egypt and getting FGM. Yeah. Yeah. So like at this time, like 90% of girls in Egypt have this done to them. And for those of you who don't know, yeah. They basically take a razor blade to the little girl's clitoris, slice it off, sew her up. So that she can just basically, she can urinate, she can get her period, but they got to make sure that nothing's going to get in there. But, she'll stay a virgin. So she's mutilated. So this doesn't happen in my family. So this is like a it's like a what's the word I'm like? It's like a class thing, right?
I was going to ask you about that because you come from quite an upper class in Egypt. This doesn't sound like this happens to those women. This is an
Not in my family.
Rural area situation.
Yeah, but it happened. But it's like 90% of Egyptian girls at this time. So that's most of Egypt, right?
And what year was this?
This was 1996.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when they started talking about doing this to my daughter, that's when I realized like, oh, wow, my daughter's going to have an even worse life than mine has been, which was, I thought I was going to be able to protect her. And then at that moment, I realized I can't protect her against both of these people. Her life is going to be even worse. It's not going to be better. I thought I could make it better. I didn't have the power to make it better as long as
What
these two.
Sorry, what about the rest of your family in Egypt at this point? I did wonder that. I was thinking about that when I was listening. I'm like, what about the rest of your extended family in Egypt at this point?
Yeah. So at this point, my daughter was a little baby, and they
Okay.
started having the conversation because he didn't know. He's like, when are we going to take her to get her fixed? When are we going to take her to get her
Oh,
cleaned?
Jesus.
Yeah. And then my mom said, oh, no, 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 we don't do that now. When she's like 5 or 6 years old, we'll take her to Egypt and then we'll get it done. Yeah.
Oh,
So
and
that's
they,
how
by
I
the
knew.
way, and they don't
Yeah.
freeze them and they're awake
No, no,
and
no,
there's
no, no.
nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So here I am talking about my perfect little girl that I'm going to do everything to protect. And then they're talking about taking her in a few years to Egypt to get this done to her. So I knew that I had to get out of this house with my daughter before this could happen to her. Even though my family in Egypt, like I said, nobody in my family does that. None of them do it to their daughters. It's just not a thing in our family, but it's a thing in his family, and he's the father. So he's the one who would decide, and you can get it done in Egypt anywhere, all the time,
Oof.
right? It's a very common procedure. It's been criminalized now, but of course it still happens everywhere. Yeah. And so that was my first inkling, like, okay, I need to get out of here. But when I'm a high school educated girl, I have nothing. And this is the days before social media or anything. So I've zero connection with any of my friends from high school. I have no connection with Tiffany anymore. It's just me and my little girl and my high school diploma. Like, how am I going to survive? And so I didn't move fast enough. But long, convoluted series of unfortunate events. Eventually, I was able to get myself and my daughter out. Eventually, I was able to get a divorce from him, get a restraining order, get full custody of my daughter, start my life over again, get away from my mom, go to UBC, do all of the shameful things, live by myself, like with my daughter, of course, but like no man was there. So it's considered by yourself. And then just became that like dishonorable embarrassment on my mom because she's still the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school. And her daughter is essentially like, as they would see me as just like some whore, basically. Because as a Muslim woman, you live with your father and then you live with your husband. That's it. There's no living on your own. But I had to get her away from both of them. And thankfully, CSIS, who are the Canadian CIA,
Yep.
I know you know that, Canadian Secret Service, had contacted me and showed me pictures of him behind bars in Egypt. So I knew that I could sort of be free enough. I didn't know who his friends were because, of course, it's Al-Qaeda, and I didn't know who he was going to send after me. So we were still very careful. Still changed her name so that he wouldn't be able to find us. But yeah, that was the beginning of freedom for me.
How did that feel when CISA sat you down and said, the father of your child is in a prison cell and cannot touch you anymore?
Oh man, I was so ready to hear it by then because I was basically I put myself under house arrest because restraining
Right.
order doesn't do anything, right? The cop was really good with explaining to me the limitations of a restraining order, and he essentially said to me, "You can't leave this apartment because this is the only place we can say he can't come within whatever it was 150 meters or 200 meters, I can't remember. He can't come within your school, your work, your home, I'm like, I got none of those things. I just got this apartment. My mom's apartment at the time wasn't even my own. And he's like, well, then this is the only place you're safe. I couldn't even take my daughter to the park, couldn't leave the house. And so when they showed me pictures, because telling me wasn't good enough, I was still scared. Yeah. But when, like, I remember that photo and feeling like I could see the rage in his face. I I know that body language. I know those eyes. And it scared me because I could tell how it was like a tornado being held in his body.
Mhm.
You know, he was just ready to attack. And the way he was gripping the bars, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, like it was scary, but at the same time, I felt such relief because I didn't have to stay in my mom's apartment anymore. Now I could get out and start my life.
How has that been with having a child from an Al-Qaeda member nowadays? I mean, when we look, I mean, for God's sakes, this was in the late 90s. When we look at this, we went through 9/11, we went through Iraq, we went through Afghanistan. How is that? Because those members are still very much, for people who don't get it, we still have a ton of terrorists in America and Canada. We have them
Absolutely.
in the UK, we have them everywhere. And so these sleeper cells exist. They're a lot more out there than people would like to acknowledge, but it doesn't feel like we discuss the fact that they're in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of them in Canada. In fact, some of them get Canadian citizenship, you know? So, yeah. And the situation with Assam was because he was a jihadi, Egypt had taken away his citizenship, basically. He didn't have a Egyptian passport anymore because they said, you're a persona non grata, we don't claim you.
Right.
And
But
he's
Canada
in Afghanistan. Yeah, exactly. So he's like in Afghanistan this whole time with bin Laden, and then the plans for 9/11 start and things like that. And he's somebody who's been with him since he was like a teenager, right? He went there when he was like 18 or 19. He told his family he's going to university abroad, but he actually ended up going to Afghanistan. And so at this point he's like 36 or something like that. Like they have a tight relationship. They know he can trust him. So he's one of the ones that he wants to send to White Rock, where I was living at the time. Just in those days, you could cross the border from Canada to America. You don't even have to show your driver's license. Like, it was just so normal. We would, in fact, cross the border and go into the States easier than we would drive into Vancouver because it was just closer. And there's malls there, and it was like less traffic. So it was very, very easy to cross the border. And so when he came into Canada, he came with a fake. Okay, this is a man coming from Afghanistan. Right. This is during the Mujahideen time. Like, we know what's happening in Afghanistan. It's not like we thought it was just, some
they were just play fighting.
Yeah. Like, we know what's going on there these days.
Right.
He's coming from Afghanistan with a fake Saudi Arabian passport.
They're allowed everywhere.
Yep. And they find out, oh, this passport is fake from this man who's actually Egyptian, who's coming to us from Afghanistan. Hey, you know what? Let's give him refugee status.
Come on in.
They let him in. They let him in. They gave him refugee status. They were giving him all sorts of support. He was getting money for like education and housing, and like they invited him into their home and took care of him. And of course, was part of the 9/11 effort, him and his whole network of friends that were all around Canada, America, like all just kind of waiting to do their job or to do their whatever the bidding is, that they're being told. Like you said, sleeper cells everywhere and the whole network. And sometimes they wouldn't even know of each other.
Right.
So what happened was, when Assam went to prison initially, when they found out that his passport was fake, it was some guy from California that bin Laden wired the guy in California money and said, go and pay Assam's bail. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
How did CSIS? So what did you say something to CSIS afterwards? Like, hey, you brought him into the country. Who was the guy tracking him? Why is that guy not fired?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is CSIS would have never been able to contact me if they hadn't been tracking him.
Right.
Yeah. Because it was such a tiny little narrow window. So remember I was telling you
Right.
I was basically imprisoned in the home. So what
Mm-hmm.
happened was my mom had a medical emergency and I got into the ambulance with my daughter and went to the hospital. I
Okay.
never would have left the house without his permission. In fact, I was petrified to even leave the house at that time. But I only did it because my mom was like bleeding profusely from her nose and mouth and I was scared. And so I was like, he's gonna have to understand, like Allah's
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to forgive me, but I'm gonna
Right.
go with my mom to the hospital. I think it'll be okay. And in the hospital, the moment my mom got whisked off to whatever room she was in, I was approached by a man and a woman. Like it did not take, it was when they said they were CSIS, I thought that was like a medical term because I had no idea.
How wild is the reality that they're all around you and nobody wants to even pretend that they are literally the car down the street watching you with the
Yeah,
Starbucks in their hand and the mom with the dog?
yeah, they must have. And there were so many 911 calls when he would be beating me and breaking my bones and like there was hospitalizations, there were things they knew. And of course they would have known about when I was 13 years old and I alerted the authorities to the man that my mom had married and how he was abusing me. And so they knew that there was um discontent. They knew that they could come
Discontent.
to me. I don't know.
Okay.
They knew that they could come to me and talk to me and that I would be willing to listen and I wasn't going to
Right.
be like running back to him or my mom and telling them
Right.
what they said. Um, but I did not know like the level because my mom had told me when he was in Afghanistan that he was driving Red Crescent trucks and teaching little boys self-defense and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
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 At their schools where they
Yeah.
love everyone and don't show them books of Jews and how they should murder every child the second they're
Yeah.
born because they're terrible or we're all going to hell because we're Western.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Right. Just
None of
like the
that.
girl who looked at me with my blonde hair and touched me, who was then. So, right. Because that stuff's totally normal behavior. Like all of that's super normal behavior.
Mm. Yeah, but like I said, the most heinous things are so normalized that you don't even think to question them, you know? And
So
yeah.
then how does that play into life now? Because when we're looking at the Western capacity with radicalism versus reform, you have an organization that I think is super fascinating. You do a couple different things, but I want to talk about Free Hearts, Free Minds. And again, we're going to do another episode where we break down a little more. I do want to do an episode where we do break down your media representation and global awareness around things around advocacy and the cultural misunderstandings that happen, because I think there's a lot of like you said, it's very convoluted. And I think a lot of people have this perception that if you disagree with Islam, then you're disagreeing with Muslims. And I think that that's far removed from the understanding. But before we do that, talk to me about Free Hearts and Free Minds and how that came up and what was it that inspired that nonprofit, because it's very different than anyone I've seen before.
Yeah. So essentially what happened was when I started going to UBC, I took a history of religions course, which I started to intellectually unravel all of, because as a Muslim, you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to think, you just have to do, believe, And then 9/11 happened. And so I was emotionally bombarded by that. And I felt at that moment that I had saved my daughter physically, like she was in a safe place physically. But after 9/11, I realized that she's surrounded by friends, family, community who are celebrating the deaths of innocent people, like jubilant, joyful celebrations. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I need to save her emotionally as well, psychologically. I cannot raise her in this environment. I cannot
Right.
raise her in this ideology. And so I was already feeling at that point, because of the history of religions course, I was already questioning the religion. And so after 9/11, that's when I realized, like, I cannot have anything to do with this religion anymore. But the punishment for being born and raised a Muslim and then renouncing Islam, the punishment for that is execution. Yeah. And that can be carried out by any believing Muslim. In fact, you would be, lauded, you would be applauded because you took down one of these horrible, traitors to the religion.
Right. And honor killings, they don't happen in Canada at all.
Oh my gosh. With the honor killings and the honor violence, we have so many examples all over the Western world, and we can at least know about them in the Western world. You're not going to hear about them in Egypt and Pakistan and Sudan and Somalia, etc. Those girls just disappear and nobody says anything, right? But yeah, the perpetrators of these crimes are the heroes, and the girls that are killed are the shameful things, right? And so I was absolutely petrified. My mom had threatened to kill me, and I knew it was valid. She was such a believer. And as far as she was concerned, it was just an equation. She's like, I brought you into this world, and I will be punished if you are a non-believer. And so I need to make sure that you are killed, because then I'm repenting for that, so that I don't get, burned for eternity. So I had to be as quiet as possible when I renounced this religion. And you have to go through that whole, like, who am I? The trauma of it all, the, identity crisis of it all, the isolation of it all, and as a single mom, so I don't even have time to think about it or feel it, because I have to, like, go to school, I have to go to work, I have to take care of my kid. And because of that experience, I started to realize, like, wow, there are so many people around the world, because by now I'm talking like 2016, social media is a thing. I'm learning about people like me all over the world. I've started writing my book. I'm posting chapters on Tumblr. I'm bombarded with messages from people all over the world relating to my story, sharing their stories. I'm meeting up with these people on Skype, and we're messaging each other. And I'm just feeling like, whew, there are so many people out there in, like, way worse situations than I was, because I could at least get student loans, go to university, start my life over. What are you going to do when you're in Saudi Arabia? Right?
Good luck.
Good luck. What are you going to, there's nothing. What are you going to do if you're a lesbian in Egypt? You know what I mean? Like, there's no avenues here.
No.
And I certainly was not equipped to take on all of this, because I was just being re-triggered. And I was already, as I mentioned to you, in a very fragile state of mind. And so I realized I have to do something. And so that's why I created this organization, which I'll be the face. I'll bring in, like, I'll tell your stories, because obviously none of these people can be public. You're in Pakistan or in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or whatever, like, you're going to be killed. So I'll put myself out there, and then the people will trust me. They'll contact me, and then I can connect them with therapists, with counselors, with facilitators for group sessions, individual sessions, where we can create a community where we can support each other. There's a way for people to feel seen and heard. And like you said, not crazy, because that's what you're taught. That's how you feel when everybody around you is believing these crazy stories, and you're the only one going, that doesn't sound right. I don't know if I should be celebrating a 53-year-old man marrying a 6-year-old girl. Like, then you're the bad one. And so I realized that we need each other. We need to support each other. Even being able to speak to somebody who can listen to you and nod and finish your sentences without making you, judging you, making you feel like you're crazy or you're bad or you're wrong. Like, that is, if we only did that, that would be enough,
Right.
And so that's how the organization started. So it's called Free Hearts, Free Minds, because free hearts is referring to homosexuals. Anyone in the gay community would have had it way worse than me. because as a
Mhm.
straight woman, at least I got filled with self-hate just because I was a woman. But I
Right.
mean, if you're gay, you're going to get filled with even more self-hate. So
Mhm.
that's free hearts. And then, of course, free minds is for free thinkers, for those of us who, like you described, prefer to like look at the evidence and change our mind when the evidence presents itself differently, and
Right.
versus just being accepting whatever Kool-Aid you're being fed. And so that, back to like what we were saying earlier when you were asking me about doing this work and how daunting it is and how tiring it is and how difficult and exhausting and dark it is, free hearts free minds is my light. That is my source of just goodness. And
Right.
and it's like ripple effects, so
Mhm.
every person that you help, then they will write their book, or they will start a podcast, or they will start a philosophy club in their university, or whatever it is. Like, so everybody's just paying it forward, and we're just causing huge ripples, and we're catching more and more people throughout, because there is a renaissance going on throughout the Middle East right now
Oh, yes.
that I hope people will be aware of and start to feel hope, knowing that the internet has really been able to bring in voices, perspectives that people who were living in these totalitarian states would have never had access to. If you're only getting the curriculum from the school and they are feeding whatever indoctrination they want to feed to you, or the media, or
Mhm.
whatever it is, you're getting the same narratives, you're getting the same propaganda, you're getting the same lies. But now people can go on YouTube, they can listen to this podcast, they can start to, read articles, and it is opening hearts and minds. It's free thinkers are just popping up everywhere at an alarming rate. I mean, it's beautiful because, it gives you hope. But of course, at the same time, they are all in danger. It's very,
Of
very
course.
difficult. Um, and so we are the only nonprofit on the planet that focuses on this vulnerable group. And so you can imagine the wait list, and we're doing everything we can to serve as many people as we possibly can. But, of course, it all just depends on the donations to wait list, that whole
Yeah.
balancing act. And, but it's other than my two girls, it is my greatest pride and joy. I feel grateful that I was able to contribute this to the planet. You know, I was able to do this, to bring this to the world.
It's not a surprise to me that you are the person to do it, considering your mother thought she could never get pregnant again. And oopsie, here comes the one that's going to break the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been the fighter from the start. It's not a shock to me that you're not doing that. And it would be a shame. We go through hard things in our life so that we can then show people how to walk through them. It's our responsibility and my belief set that once you walk through hell, it is your responsibility to turn around with the brightest light you have and start pulling people through, regardless of how you feel about it. You're put on a path for a reason, period, full stop.
Mhm.
It's not your choice. And people will
Yeah.
say, of course it's your choice. We have free will. And my response is, some of us are just put in places to be louder than others for a reason. We don't have to love how it feels all the time, but we have to have the tools and the community around us so that we can handle the weight and the burden of the
Yeah.
trauma that we've endured. And you are a definition of that light. There's very few people that I call the lighthouse for their communities. You definitely are one of those. So how do we help? What do we do? How do we get more support to you? How do I help?
Yeah, I would love for people to go to the website, freeheartsfreeminds.com, read some testimonials from the people that we've supported. You can go to our YouTube channel and watch some of the videos. People are covering their faces, nothing to do with COVID. It's about security,
Right.
safety. But some people have shared their stories. And I hope you feel compelled to support them. I hope you feel motivated and encouraged to spread this light. And, at the end of the day, people can say, oh, it's just happening over there. It's not happening over here. But as well as I do, it's happening in all of our backyards. And so it's in all of our best interests to spread this light and to empower and to encourage the free thinkers in these draconian totalitarian societies, you know, it's in our best interest to spread that light so that we can, you know, stamp out the darkness as much as possible.
I have one last question, and I should have asked it earlier, but I do want to know your thoughts on this. Talk to me about how you feel about women being forced, because I do believe it is force. I don't believe it is choice. After we saved the family in Afghanistan that helped run the women's right division of the Afghan government, and her girls, they came to America and Canada, they took their hijab off. So tell me, how do you feel about girls being forced to cover themselves while they eat and while they move and how they move? I have a problem with it, but others will say it's a choice.
Oh, man. Of course you have a problem with it because you're an empathetic human being. You know what I mean? Because you have a functioning brain. Anybody who doesn't have a problem with it is I hope that they're just lying to themselves. You know, I hope that they don't actually believe that anybody would choose to do this to themselves. Would any of these people who think that this is a choice, like, would they ever make that choice? Would they ever say, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to wrap myself up in a death shroud while I'm still breathing. How can you pretend that you know nothing about the human spirit? How can you pretend that that is a choice? Like, you know that it's not. You absolutely know that it's not. You have been trained to parrot that it's a choice because that's the propaganda that was fed to you. And people that say that are playing the part of the useful idiots. They are parroting what these extremists want them to parrot. So they are providing cover, they are carrying water for these extremists. For anyone who thinks that it might be a choice, I encourage them to please look at the woman life freedom movement in Iran. These women have literally risked and lost their lives trying to get the point across to you all that this is not a choice. These women are burning their hijabs in the streets as the IRGC are there pointing guns at them, shooting them in the eyeballs, shooting them in the genitals, shooting them in the breasts, raping them to death, right? Imprisoning them, torturing them, killing them. And they are still out there trying to get the message out that this is not a choice, that this is gender apartheid, that this is just, it is the physical representation of the slavery of women. That's what it is. It's like, would you look at a slave in chains and say, oh, that's his choice? That's what it feels like when you say about a woman in hijab, that's her choice. You know, we are not only indoctrinated into this from a young age, being told if you don't do it, then you're dirty, filthy, gonna burn in hell for eternity, all that stuff, but we are punished for it. Most of the girls that are victims of honor violence and honor killings are over hijab.
Yep.
The 16-year-old girl, Aqsa Parvez in Mississauga, Ontario, that was killed by her father and her brother, it was over hijab. Like,
Right.
how many girls have to die? How many women have to risk their lives trying to express to you that this is the chain? This is the tip of the iceberg, too. Like, we can't even convince you about the tip of the iceberg. Like, forget all the other parts.
Right.
How much worse it really is. But we're just trying to show you, like, this physical representation of the dehumanization of women. Can you at least be convinced that this very obvious thing right here exists? And then maybe we can start about talking about all the other subjugation of women that is below the surface of the water, you know? But it just, as you can tell from my response and my reaction to this, like, it is such a betrayal of humanity that people would repeat, that they would parrot these lies, this propaganda, and not only repeat it, they they celebrate it.
Yes,
You know what I mean? They put hijab on every flat surface. Barbie's head, cover of Sports Illustrated, apps, you know, Spider-Man movies,
Yep.
Disney
We're trying
movies,
to normalize.
Inside
We're trying
Out.
to normalize.
Trying to normalize something that's getting women killed currently. We're not talking about history. We're not talking about, we're talking about right now in your country. Like, we're not even talking about like this is only happening in Afghanistan or something. Like, this is happening here in your backyard.
Yeah.
And you're going to put it on buses and we're supposed to celebrate this?
Or like, Nike.
Oh, Nike.
Nike, the women's Olympic uniforms, the swimmers, the runners, this just, we're here to support women. You are a part of the oppression. You are a part of the problem.
Absolutely, 100%. The way during the Women's March of 2016, the way they took an American flag, quintessential symbol of freedom, and they contorted it into a hijab, which is this tool of slavery of women, of subjugation and misogyny. And then they sold it as like women's empowerment. And there's all these fucking useful idiots with their posters of a woman in an American flag hijab. Like, what could be more perverted than pretending that this thing that gets women killed is in any way equated to this symbol of freedom? You know?
It's similar to burning the flag. Why not just show the oppression in a different version? It's disgusting, and to me it's demeaning, and to anybody who wants to argue with me about it, you're welcome on the show to have this argument. I'm glad to have it with you, because it is being shown as a symbol of women's rights, and it's shown time and time again. And look, you can say that it's not oppression, but I beg to differ when I've seen what happens when a little girl slips or their hair accidentally shows. You see the panic. You've seen it with the runners during the Olympics and the Olympic trials. When it slipped, everyone around her covered her as quickly as possible because they knew she would be punished if that was seen on national and international television with her hair out.
Mm-hmm. And these people that say it's not oppression, would they say the same thing about Mormon girls or Baptist girls, right? FLDS girls? They know the difference. They just pretend that for these girls are different. They're like a subspecies of human or something, and it's different for them. You know, no, it's not different. It's just like the pedophilia with them is different, right? We're not going to put up with it with FLDS, but we'll put up with it over there. We're not going to talk about it because that's Islamophobic, you know, whereas in these other, if it's a Christian cult, if it's Christian fundamentalism, absolutely get the FBI in there. We got to deal with this, right? But they know the difference. And why are we seen as subhuman? Why are we not recognized and valued in the same way that they recognize and value themselves and their sisters and their mothers and their daughters? Because they know slut shaming, they know rape culture, they know victim blaming, they know all of these, they understand modesty culture, they know purity culture, and they speak out against it all the time. They're like, free the nipple, right? Like you know, you understand what we're talking about here. And now we've got the most extreme version, right? We've got a massive mountain in front of you here that you cannot deny. And you're like, no, let me focus on this little molehill over here. Look at what these bad Christians are doing.
Right. Yeah, because how dare we renounce? Well, because you know what? I'll be honest with you. People aren't afraid of Christians. People are terrified of Muslims or Islamists who will strap bombs to their children and send them over to you. They are afraid of people who will leave everything they have, come to another country they do not know, play the long game for a decade, who will make bombs out of kitchen items. They are afraid of people who are willing to die just to watch you die. That's why they will never touch Islam, because Islam is a religion that will genuinely, an ideology that will genuinely have no problem taking themselves and you and everyone you love off the face of the earth, whereas Christians and Catholics and Jews and Buddhists and anyone else, if we did that to another human, could you imagine?
No,
They're not afraid
you're
of
absolutely
us.
correct. They are not. And they are the true Islamophobes in this scenario, really, because they are afraid of Islam and Muslims. But for them to pretend, admit it then. Just say,
Then say it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they are doing this to their daughters. Yeah, they are horrible subjugation of women, but I'm not going to talk about it because I'm afraid because there's so many terrorists that come from this ideology. So say that then. Don't pretend that it's a choice. You know what I mean? Like that is it's so insulting. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. It's so insulting. Listen, Yasmine, the part of the problem is you and I could sit here and talk for 9 to 12 hours without taking a break. And I know that both you and I have things to do and worlds to change and people to meet. And I would love nothing more to have you on again in the next couple months and really dive into some of these other issues that I think are so hyper controversial, but need to be spoken about with such educated individuals like yourself and those that have real lived experience. I'm not interested in talking to scholars who have only ever read books. I'm interested in the individuals who have gone through the lived experience. Yours is of value. And I am I say this with so much respect. In almost 5 years of doing this show, you are one of the people I have been most excited to sit across from for so many different reasons. And your story is not only saving millions of lives, I know it will be the reason why people start to shift their perspective. So thank you for your time and thank you for the bravery in writing the book that you did and standing up and being everything that your mother could not be.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Kelsey. And thank you for having the courage to bring me on, because let's face it, that's the reality. Anyone who brings me on to speak and to tell my story, I'm incredibly grateful to, because I know that you are taking a risk in doing that and you are being brave, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, look, I always joke around like they couldn't do it the first time, they're not going to do it the second time. So I'm going to keep talking and saying that. How do people support Free Hearts and Free Minds? How do they follow you on social? How do they go get your book? Because it's been translated. So for those that are listening, you have had that thing translated in over 15 different languages, and it is spreading across the globe like wildfire. So how do they get it?
So depending on which country you're in, you can probably get it from Amazon. The Richard Dawkins Foundation has some translations online for free. So Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, and Indonesian. So like you mentioned, it's available in 17 different languages. So if you're in Germany, you can get it from the German publisher. You're in Spain, you can get it from it's an Argentinian publisher in Spanish. So, so the book is called Unveiled: How the West Empowers Radical Muslims. And like you mentioned, there's also the audiobook. My podcast is called the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. People can tune into that and join the community there. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I've got my website, yasminemohammed.com, where you can hit contact and write to me if you have anything that you want to say to me or ask me. And most importantly, my organization is Free Hearts, Free Minds. And I really hope that people will go to that website to learn about the people that we're supporting and to be encouraged to hit that donate button and to help save lives and to help spread light throughout the globe.
And I've never heard somebody say it so truthfully. You really are saving lives. This is not just a book. This is not just a movement. You really are saving lives. So thank you so much. And you stick with me. Everyone else, please go grab this book. It is a hard listen. I do recommend it by audio. I'm a big believer in hearing the author's voice because you get the emotion. So if you are listening, I grabbed mine in Canada just from the library there on Apple Books, but I do know that you might need a VPN in Canada. So I'm not sponsored by ExpressVPN or associated at all, but people have been asking. That is the VPN I do use in this country, and it does work well. So I encourage you to go grab it. And then everyone else, do yourself a favor. go donate some money. You go buy Starbucks every goddamn day. You know it anyway. So take that $5 of, high dense calorie sugar that you didn't need in the first place anyway. Go over to Free Hearts, Free Minds. We will put the link in the bio. Go donate, even if it's $5, guys. You'd be surprised what $5 can do for somebody who feels like their entire world around them hates them, never wants to see them thrive. But I promise you, it will change your life. So in saying that, go subscribe, go do the thing, and we will see you all next week.